Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Tuesday, March the 15th, 2022. Let's start today by asking the question, is Ukraine the 51st state? We've learned in the last 3 weeks that the Ukraine has apparently replaced Israel as our greatest ally, but is it the 51st state or the 11th province of Canada? Seems that way. But let's first ask a question a very relevant question that no one seems to be asking. This is from Chris Mahan at Information Liberation. Today, News Africa reporter Simon Atebe asked White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, what the U.S. endgame is in Ukraine, and questioned if the real goal was to push Ukrainians to, quote, commit suicide in a futile war to bog down the Russians. Here's the transcript. I'm trying to understand where you were going, your endgame in Ukraine. You're not going there. You're not sending troops there. There will be no fly zone over Ukraine. And will it be a fair assessment to say that you're pushing these guys to commit suicide, knowing that Russia has a superpower and eventually it will capture the main cities, Kiev and Kharkiv, and other cities around there? What's the endgame? Psaki responded, well, the endgame is really a question for President Putin. We have completely crushed his economy. We have provided military assistance, humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainians, enabling them to fight back for far longer than the Russian leadership anticipated. And again, he has to determine what the path forward looks like for him. And Chris Menahan comments, this is exactly what I reported on a week ago, detailing how the neocons running the Biden regime are trying to foment an insurgency in Ukraine as part of a U.S. proxy war with Russia and couldn't care less what happens to the Ukrainian people as a result. As Psaki admitted, the goal is for them to fight back longer than Russia anticipated. The $13.6 billion in aid our corrupt Congress and Joe Biden just approved for Ukraine is likely just a crude bribe to President Zelensky to keep the war going and convince him not to surrender. It was looking like Zelensky was going to accept Putin's perfectly reasonable terms of surrender, which even Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett told him to upset, before this $13.6 million in bribe money popped up. Now Zelensky is suggesting he's going to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. Oliver Carroll tweeted, in a new message, Zelensky appeals to Russian soldiers, quote, you won't take anything from Ukraine, you will take lives, but we will take your lives too. We offer you choice. If you surrender, we will treat you as people should be treated, with dignity, not like your army has treated you, unquote. I don't believe for a second that surrendering Russian soldiers are going to be treated with anything like dignity by the Ukrainians. Does anyone actually believe that? I wanted to take a look at what you might call the bigger picture that's going on here. And we'll go to Eugenius, who has been a wellspring for this live stream, both on the topic of Corona Doom and on Ukraine. He has a piece yesterday called The Globalist Enemy. Fighting in Ukraine is not about defending freedom. We lost that a long time ago. 9 days ago, an American Marine Corps veteran and Reddit user left the United States to fight the Russians with Ukrainian Foreign Legion. Quote, I am an EMT USMC vet with combat and trauma experience. I'll be arriving the 9th with a decent amount of medical gear to volunteer where needed. I also have friends who are trying to accumulate recently expired medical supplies from hospitals in the state I'm from. I'm hoping to establish a logistical channel to get those supplies from them to me on the ground and to areas where they're critically needed. Last night, Russian missiles hit his training base in Lviv, which is in the far west of Ukraine near the Polish border. And this EMT continues, yes, I was here today and blown off the top bunk of my bunk bed in the barracks by the first missile. I made a long post about it, but my posts don't show on this thread for some reason. This is where all the Foreign Legion troops are. The 35 killed were all Ukrainian, mostly due to a direct hit on their barracks next to mine. The base is destroyed, the weapons depot destroyed, possibly the end of the Legion. About 60 people with their heads on straight, including myself, left after the attack. They're sending untrained guys to the front with little ammo and shit AKs, and they're getting killed. The guys who stayed got bombed again in the afternoon, and casualties aren't clear. If you still want to join them, I'm not sure what the process will be, since literally all the infrastructure supporting the training assignments of volunteers is all destroyed. The guys who are there now will all be going to Kiev, and many will die. The Legion is totally ungunned and has a few crazy Ukrainian leaders. After the attack, one officer wanted to march everyone to Kiev and fight. Absolute insanity. Stay home. The trainees who did not desert were sent to die near Kiev. The scene there. Nolan Peterson tweets from an American volunteer on the front lines outside of Kiev. Sitting close to the front line, the last safe mode of transportation leaves for greener pastures. A core group of about 30 foreign fighters remains out of about 200 people who were here just minutes ago. The base we came from was struck by rockets in the early morning hours. People we lived with for a couple of days are confirmed dead. It is only a matter of time before our location is targeted. We are about to be cut off by a Russian tank column any day now. Food, water, and ammunition dwindle slowly. The mood is somber. People are sending their last messages to friends and family. Eugenius comments, the International Legion of Traditional Defense of Ukraine wants you to save the world and stand with Ukraine. You can volunteer if you have any military experience or know firsthand how to handle weapons, or are confident in military and high-stress situations, or have a strong will to defend world peace, or are ready to join right now. If those sound like low standards, they are. The Ukrainian Foreign Legion is a cannon fodder farming operation. Recruits who sign up to die shooting Soviet-era rifles at Russian battle tanks are not defending world peace or democracy or freedom or anything like that. They are sacrificing themselves to convenience some peripheral interests of Western globalism, which was responsible for all manner of armed conflict around the world and which could not be less interested in these quaint liberal abstractions. We are in the end stage of liberalism now, an end stage in which most liberal political forms have been set aside in favor of a naked, if distributed, autocracy. He notes that his earlier post on the Ukraine yielded many angry emails and some angry comments. Many believe that I need to support the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom and national autonomy. The truth is that the Ukrainians are the proxy of the global American empire, and that is the only reason that the media has called upon Westerners to care about this conflict rather than any others. Lockdowns weren't a one-off. The vaccinators don't just vaccinate. The enemies who have oppressed us these past 2 years are appendages of a much broader system: climatism, anti-racism, transgender lunacy, corona, and now the Ukraine. They are all of them expressions of the same malign force. They are all of them the same thing. Now, a day earlier, Eugenius had, I guess he's noticed something, well, that I've noticed and others have noticed, that there don't seem to be several issues out there. There seems to be one issue, which is them versus us. How can we be humiliated, replaced, canceled, reduced, etc., etc.? He writes, did Corona kill climate change? Preliminary thoughts on Corona and climatism as competing ideological systems and why that might be very bad. Conventional wisdom holds that global elites will pivot to climate change now that Corona is ending. I'm starting to think that this might not happen and that we misinterpreted the ideological significance of Corona. Perhaps Corona happened because climate change was not good enough, because as a politically orienting ideological system, it had failed to mobilize institutions and populations in the right way, and it entered the first stages of decline. Perhaps in the coming decades, there will be other hysterias, but no real ideological push on the climate front ever again. I'm not saying that climatologists, their institutions, and associated grifts will disappear tomorrow. In any scenario, they'll plug on for a long time. What I am imagining, though, is a future in which they'll be steadily deprived of inertia and ultimately fade into the background like the war on terror. First, to disarm some objections, here I'm only talking about the ideological and political prescriptions that fall under the climate change heading. We might call this phenomenon climatism, just as I use Corona to denote the broader political and ideological phenomenon surrounding the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. Climatism is an ideological superstructure that rests on a foundation of empirical observations and scientific theory about the Earth's atmosphere and temperature. For the sake of argument, I'll assume that this empirical substructure is mostly true and accurately portrayed. You can be skeptical of the corona response without denying that there is a virus, and you can be skeptical of climatism while accepting that the Earth is getting warmer. Importantly, ceding all that ground doesn't return climatism as the only or the most necessary political response. You could imagine many solutions. Nations which accept that carbon emissions are trapping greenhouse gases and heating the Earth unsustainably might engage in warfare to destroy the industrial capacity of rival nations, or they might vastly expand the generation of nuclear power, or they might count on technological developments to counter the impact of higher temperatures in the future. In the same way, mass lockdowns, mask mandates, and universal vaccination are not the only or even the most obvious response to a pandemic respiratory virus. All other respiratory viruses in history were met with very different policies. Corona and climatism both claim to be rooted in the science, but that should not distract us from the obvious truth that they are contingent cultural and ideological phenomenon. And Eugenius concludes here, this makes it particularly intriguing that corona and climatism should have so many commonalities. Well, if we go back to the 1980s, the HIV/AIDS hysteria had many commonalities as well. I mentioned previously that we seem to be enduring a succession of death wishes from an elite which no longer believes in God, but believes in the devil. Well, a secular kind of devil. We had a nuclear winter and that didn't pan out. And then we moved on to climate change. And we've had the BLM racism hysteria, the sexism hysteria. It's one hysteria. Well, the transgender hysteria. It's one after another after another. And as Eugenius points out, they are essentially the same thing. This is the Great Reset. We will own everything. You will own nothing. You will have no power and no property, and you may not like it, but what are you going to do about it, eh? Because that's the question. It always comes down to this. What are you going to do about it? I noticed that going back 2 decades ago, that the idea of democracy as it had been traditionally understood, the power of the people, was just waved away like this with the French wave. In London, to give 2 examples, something like 500,000 or 600,000 people marched against the invasion of Iraq. The response of the government, of the elite, was, what are you going to do about it? Similarly, about 500,000 people marched against making blood sports illegal, and the response of the elite was, what are you going to do about it? You see what happened in Ottawa with the truckers' convoy. Oh, yes, bring your trucks and we will pretend that we're all having a nervous breakdown and that you're all a bunch of misogynists and rapists and white nationalists and the like. But ultimately, what are you going to do about it? We are going to declare an emergency. We are going to freeze your bank accounts. We are going to remove your trucks, seize your trucks. We are going to arrest you. And what are you going to do about it? Whom? That's the big question. Now, Frank Wright, who has a Substack, and I mentioned him previously, he just happens to have interviewed Eugenius yesterday. And what can you tell us about yourself without compromising your identity? I'm a mid-career academic in my later 30s, early 40s. By training, I'm a kind of ancient historian / philologist. It's a very small field, but I can't be too specific. I'm mostly educated in the US, and I also had part of my career there. I finally left my professorship at an American uni because it was too politically extreme. I was a little worried about getting canceled, but mostly disgusted by my colleagues and the broader environment. So I returned to Germany. What motivated you to start a plague journal? I realized something was very wrong with media portrayals of Corona and the politics surrounding it relatively late, around the summer of 2020. I didn't have much of an audience back then, but I suspected we had been seriously deceived about many aspects of the virus and also about the effectiveness of countermeasures. I started writing consistently and building a following, first on Twitter. During the second 7-month German lockdown, the enforced solitude and idleness were really hard to deal with. What's your view of the world? Has it changed as a result of your work? I think above all, I've come to appreciate better how many of our problems are systemic and interrelated. Mass immigration, corona hysteria, globalization, consumerism, anti racism, homosexuality and transgenderism, climate change nonsense, foreign military intervention. It is all tightly interrelated, and these are all different facets of the same phenomenon, even if it's not always easy to figure out how or why. What's your opinion on contemporary politics? I think it's bad and that the entire West is experiencing late stage political decay. This doesn't mean our states are coming apart or that we'll soon descend into anarchy. In many ways, it is the opposite. Our governments will become more openly autocratic as they lose their ability to act coherently towards realizable goals, and internal dissent becomes more costly for them. Above all, this decay means that there is very little discipline or direction in the exercise of power, and our governments increasingly act in irrational and unreasonable ways, and there's no obvious means of stopping them. Has your work informed your opinion of human behavior? That is a big question. I'd say this. I believe most urgently that a lot of modern behavioral pathologies are related to man's withdrawal from natural circumstances, from realities of life and death, from constraints on our abilities, from the fundamentally biological basis of our appetites and instincts, etc. I think that this alienation from nature is at the root of leftism and a lot of the most destructive leftist impulses. Have recent times informed your view of morality? Another huge question. Staying with the same theme, I think one of the fundamental problems of the modern age is that man's moral instinct persists, even in the face of pervasive secularization. This seems to have unmoored the moral instinct from its proper religious orientation. Thus, secular society has been beset by what you might call desperate, rabid moral instincts that attach themselves to all kinds of arbitrary things. What, in your view, has been the impact of COVID on institutions, government, and on popular consensus? Eugenius responds, I think it has been profound, and in the coming years, we'll discover all the ways in which we can never quite put it back in the box. Institutionally, a whole virus industry has developed. All kinds of labs and new fields of study, all manner of grant funding. SARS-1, a relatively minor event, changed the fields of epidemiology and virology fundamentally, and in many ways set the stage for corona and all this nonsense. Imagine how profoundly all the additional interest following SARS-2 will change things in the coming years. The impact will be much the same, of course, with the public health bureaucracy massively expanded and more directly in policy than ever before. And people have learned to accept all kinds of bizarre interventions in their daily lives, should anyone try to do this again. Where do we go from here? I think I can take these questions all together. As dissidents, I think the most important thing we can do is create an alternative sphere of cultural production, inquiry, and debate that is more dynamic, more true, and more interesting than the stuff going on in mainstream regime-approved outlets. This is very much what dissidents did in old Warsaw Pact countries. Over time, it is immensely corrosive for the regime-adjacent intelligentsia to be constantly outclassed and shown up by a bunch of samizdat people with anonymous anime internet accounts. It increases the costs of their lives and their propaganda. The final question to Eugenius from Frank Wright. What do you think comes next? As to what will come next, I don't know. There are very large processes of decay and dissolution here that nobody is directing, not even the elites who are presiding over the whole mess. I think we should not expect immediate improvements anytime soon. It's pretty clear that culturally and politically, something in the West is very much out of balance. That old pre-2020 world isn't coming back. I think in the medium term, there will be some kind of stabilization and the establishment of a new normal of some kind, a new kind of normal suitable to manage and explain the longer term economic and social decline that is coming. Let's take a look at the chat. Hello to Dan, Divid the Gnome, Anrun, Papcasso 88. Divid the Gnome says, I just want to let everyone know that yes, I am in fact joining the Reddit Fighting Legion in Ukraine. I was looking at some selections from Reddit on this, and you could say that they were tragicomic. I think that would be the best way to describe them. People talking about, oh, what about the vaccine status of people over there? I think a bullet or a tank shell or a rocket is going to be much more of a threat to your health than SARS-CoV-2. Hello to Head McNeck. Metal Mike says, the more I learn about the actual Nazi groups in Ukraine and their beliefs, the more shocked I am. Yet nothing about this in Western media. Oh, I don't know whether you saw this. This has been widely reported. Clint Ehrlich tweets, Ukrainian television broadcasts a segment advocating the extermination of all Russians, starting with Russian children. This appeared on Ukrainian channel 24. It quotes Nazi Adolf Eichmann, who carried out the Holocaust, quote, in order to destroy a nation, you must destroy, first of all, children. Let's see. By killing children, they will never grow up and the nation will disappear. That would be the Russian nation. The armed forces of Ukraine cannot kill Russian children because it is forbidden by the rules of law and is prohibited by various conventions, including the Geneva Convention. But I am not from the armed forces of Ukraine. And when I get the chance to take out the Russians, I will definitely do it. Since you call me a Nazi, I adhere to the doctrine of Adolf Eichmann, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that you and your children never live on this earth, so that you can feel what it is like when innocent children, civilians die, so that you can feel all the pain and suffering when you say, we didn't start this war. It was Putin. We didn't want this war. We didn't want it either. Glory to the nation, and hope there will never be such a nation as Russian and the Russians on this earth again, because they are just scum who are destroying this land. If the Ukrainians have the opportunity, which they are basically doing right now, to destroy, to slaughter, to kill, to strangle the Muscovites, and I hope that everyone contributes and whacks at least one Moscow. We have been seeing a great deal in recent days from Ukrainian voices echoing Stepan Bandera that the people of Eastern Ukraine, they're not Ukrainians, they're not Slavs, they're orcs, they're savages, they are an impure race. I am not making this up. I know we have someone in the chat and someone who follows me on Twitter who says that this is a waste of time. I don't think that it is a waste of time, precisely because perhaps if enough people keep saying that effectively the Ukrainian military forces are led by adherents of Stepan Bandera, that they are genuine neo-Nazis, that they are crazy, and that they are looking for a Holocaust, perhaps this will break through. Hello to Chogokin 666. Dr. Deadname, hello. And who else do we have here? Jean Betard de Precariat, hello. Veteran of the Greta Thunberg Battalion, says Chogokin 666. Speaking of AIDS, Rich Evans belted out a good one in the recent Wheel of the Worst, says Dan. I'll have to check that out. That suit needs a pocket squirrel. Cheers from New Mexico, says Sam B. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth. British American, hello, says, is T-shirted Zelensky wearing his huge garish Prez medallion yet? Harris says lately has been wearing hers. Hello to David Watkin and Caligula 138. Did you see Emmanuel Macron, the president of France? He's had a makeover. Normally, Macron, who's looks to be a fit man, is dressed in a business suit, looks impeccable, and he's gone the full Zelensky. You know, with a hoodie and several days' growth of beard. Whoa, this is a pretty just the gay attraction there. What can I say? Did you get my email, KMG? Says Metal Mike. I'll have to check. Okay. Wouldn't Canada be at least 10 states? Well, we have 10 provinces and 3 territories. Hello to Dionysus. Have you covered the latest from Vegano, KMG? Asks Quachalango. I spoke about him last week. I don't know if there's anything new from him. Let's follow the money here. Okay, I've talked about this previously. The Ukraine is to a very large extent a money laundering operation. that billions upon billions of dollars get sent to the Ukraine. Where does it end up? Well, it ends up in the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs. It ends up with companies like Raytheon. It ends up with people like Hunter Biden. And it comes back to the West to pay for PR spivs and the like. Fascinating piece by Pedro Gonzalez in Human Events, the Fog of War, the Fog of Information War in Ukraine. The Western intelligence apparatus has been busy in Ukraine with financing and collaboration through various non-governmental organizations. It won the information war with the help of Ukrainian media before Russia ever fired a shot in February. Even the country's newest publications, like the Kiev Independent, have received support and funding from institutions associated with the Central Intelligence Agency. In most cases, these outlets have propagandized to the beat of the West's war drums rather than informed the public. Since the Independent launched last November, it has amassed nearly 2 million Twitter followers and become a main artery of information in the war. Far from being objective, its writers tend to snap at those who contradict their narratives. Ilya Ponomarenko, the Independent's defense reporter, even declared himself, quote, brothers in arms with Azov Battalion, a unit known for committing war crimes against civilians in eastern Ukraine. According to journalist Michael Tracy, Ponomarenko amassed almost 1 million followers in less than 2 weeks. That kind of growth is hard and impressive, but the Independent also has some very special connections. The publication has a growing subscriber base today, but according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, it was created with an emergency grant from the European Endowment for Democracy, a spin-off of the National Endowment for Democracy. Whenever you hear the word democracy in any NGO, beware, because something wicked this way comes. I'm sad to say this all started during the Reagan administrations when the neocons got their claws into American government. And they set up many institutions which still exist, which exist solely to create mischief and misery around the world. Gonzalez asks, what is the NED? On the surface is an NGO that promotes civil society worldwide by, among other things, sponsoring and providing training for journalists and activists directly or indirectly. The reality, however, is different. Here's ProPublica's characterization. The National Endowment for Democracy was created by Congress, in effect, to take over the CIA's covert propaganda efforts. But unlike the CIA, the NED promotes U.S. policy and interests openly. The NED's co-founder, Alan Weinstein, admitted as much. Quote, a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA, unquote. He said in an interview with the Washington Post entitled Innocents Abroad, the New World of Spyless Coups. The biggest difference is that when such activities are done overtly, the flap potential, i.e. embarrass or embroil the CIA in controversy, is close to zero, Weinstein said. Recall that in 1967, Ramparts magazine humiliated the agency by exposing that it had turned the National Student Association's international activities into an arm of United States foreign policy through undercover financing and secret collaboration. Now, openness is its own protection, as Weinstein put it. Put simply, the NED uses democracy movements to bring foreign governments into harmony with Washington's interests. How that looks in practice takes different forms, including regime change. But a constant is formulating and managing narratives, which is why the NED has long funded media and activist groups. A recent report published by Declassified UK noted that the NED paid out more than $3 million between 2016 and 2021 to outlets like Bellingcat and Thomson Reuters Foundation. One would have think that Thomson Reuters had more than enough money, but apparently not. Echoing Weinstein, a former CIA officer told Declassified that the NED is a vehicle for U.S. government propaganda. The EED's Facebook page refers to the Independent as a partner and shows a close relationship with the NED. This is a very long article, and I'm just going to give you a part of it. Modeled after the NED, the EED's establishment was initially proposed in 2011 by Radoslaw Sikorski, a Polish journalist and a member of the European Parliament. Speaking to donors that year, he said the, quote, foundation would help develop democratic processes in the whole EU neighborhood in Belarus, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Russia, unquote. The Arab Spring has just been nurtured by an array of institutes financed through the NED. Sikorsky is also the husband of Anne Applebaum, a Polish-American staff writer for The Atlantic who sits on the NED's board of directors. The EED's Polish connection isn't an accident. While serving as director of the CIA, James Pavitt declared Poland is the 51st state. A former CIA official told the New York Times, Americans have no idea. On paper, a sovereign Poland led the charge to create the EED and is bankrolled by the European Commission, but that arguably just provides a layer of plausible deniability for its friends in DC. It's not hard to connect the blob to the NED and the EED through characters like Victoria Nuland, who currently serves as President Joe Biden's Undersecretary for Political Affairs. A board member of the NED until last year, Nuland is married to Robert Kagan, a leading advocate of liberal interventionism. From 2018 to 19, she served as CEO of the Center for a New American Security, a conflict of interest disguised as a think tank that has received funding from every major defense contractor, Wall Street's biggest banks, and several foreign governments. Her career also spans several presidential administrations. Nuland is most notorious for her part in Ukraine's 2013 to 14 Maidan uprising, a coup that saw the country's government replaced with one approved by the Obama administration. The NED was key in that $5 billion effort to flip Ukraine. Carl Gershman, who served as the NED's president from its founding in 1984 until 2021, called Ukraine the biggest prize in September 2013 in the Washington Post. Now, I'm familiar with Carl Gershman, going way back, way back. And what is Carl Gershman? He is an old Trotskyite. Now, this may seem crazy to you, but of course, Christopher Hitchens was a Trotskyite, and Christopher Hitchens ended up becoming one of George W. Bush's biggest cheerleaders. Why is that? Well, let's go back into Russian politics or Soviet politics. That Trotsky wanted international revolution, whereas Stalin wanted socialism in one country. The Trotskyites were smashed in the Soviet Union, and their leader was assassinated in Mexico. And the Trotskyites, not all of them, but a large number of them, ended up as neoconservatives. Why, you ask? Because the neoconservatives want to take everything that is traditional everywhere in the world and destroy it. The neoconservatives, and I suppose one could say the United States government, as mentioned previously, they believe that there's only two countries in the world with genuine sovereignty, and those countries are the United States and Israel. The sovereignty of every other country on earth is conditional on American approval. We've had people talking about regime change in Russia for weeks. The whole point of the Maidan Revolution and everything that's followed is to complete the encirclement of Russia with a view to regime change. And if Russia gets smashed along the way, that's even better. Because don't forget that a decade or so ago, the neocons and their allies were chortling at the demographic dissolution of Russia. They thought it was hilarious. This is from Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge, originally from Paul Joseph Watson. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky thanked Facebook for its role in helping him win the propaganda war after the platform announced it would permit calls for violence against Russians. As a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have temporarily made allowances for forms of political expression that would normally violate our rules, like violent speech such as death to the Russian invaders. We still won't allow credible calls for violence against Russian civilians, a Meta spokesperson said in a statement. Moscow responded by banning both Facebook and Instagram. President Zelensky took to Twitter, where he wrote, "War is not only a military opposition on UA land, it is also a fierce battle in the informational space. I want to thank Meta and other platforms that have an active position that help and stand side by side with the Ukrainians." Laura Logan. Oh, she's just unhinged, totally unhinged, according to Alex Griffin at Mediaite. Laura Logan, the former 60 Minutes correspondent and one-time Fox Nation host who was dropped by her agent in January from comparing Anthony Fauci to Nazi doctor Josef Mengele, is back with some more controversial comments that included Nazis. Logan appeared Tuesday on America's Voice AM on the right-wing network Real America's Voice and denounced Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as a puppet and called much of the news out of Ukraine misinformation. The interview kicked off with former Fox News chief White House correspondent Ed Henry explaining the state of play in Ukraine. Henry said Putin caused a lot of destruction, don't want to minimize the fact that there's over 2 million refugees, but this has not gone as well as Putin expected. Logan responded, I don't buy it for a second, and I'll be honest with you. I really think that there's so much misinformation. We've never really seen anything like it. I mean, I've been covering wars now for 35 years. And there's so much more going on in Ukraine that nobody is talking about. She continued, denouncing the far-right Ukrainian nationalist Azov battalion, which she claims is funded by the US and NATO. Quote, I mean, you can find pictures of them online holding up the NATO flag and the swastika, and at the same time, their own emblem contains the black sun of the occult, which was a Nazi SS emblem. She dove into a history lesson, saying the CIA under Allen Dulles actually gave immunity from prosecution to the Nazis of Ukraine from the Nuremberg trials. So there's a long history of the United States and our intelligence agencies funding and arming Nazis in Ukraine. These are not like new neo-Nazi groups that sprung up. These are the actual Nazis, she concluded. Well, I've mentioned this previously, but when one looks at Chrystia Friedland's Nazi collaborator, he was a big-time Nazi collaborator, grandfather. How did this man manage to come to Canada, be given Canadian citizenship? He should have been banned from entering Canada. If the rules had been applied, he would have been banned. But clearly what happened is that the OSS or the CIA put its thumb on Canada and said, you will take this man in. He has done services for us. And there is a piece here at American Greatness by Benjamin Braddock called The Architects of Our Present Disaster. The center is not holding. Things are falling apart. We have moved on from mass psychosis over vaccines to mass psychosis over the urgent need to go to war with Russia. The sanctions are bad enough. The early economic fallout from them is already causing pain for working and middle-class Americans. But we did sanctions last week. The public demands more. Do something, even if that thing is horrifying in its implications. 2 years of pent-up, disassociated rage is being channeled and redirected at an external target by the same people responsible for the response to COVID-19, among the worst atrocities in American history. Pax Americana is dead, and we have killed it. It didn't have to be this way. I'm reminded of a quote from Condoleezza Rice about the morning of 9/11. She knew that U.S. forces going to DEFCON 3 would trigger a similar escalation by Russia, so she called President Putin and told him our military would be going on high alert. He told her that he knew and that he had ordered his forces to stand down. Then he asked if there was anything he could do to help. Rice recounted that she had a moment of reflection. The Cold War really is over. But the choices made in the aftermath of that day by people like her unleashed a destructive zeitgeist in Washington foreign policy that has led us to this point where the specter of nuclear war now hangs in the air as it did during the tensest moments of the Cold War. The September 11, 2001 attacks were the beginning of the end for the window of opportunity we had to forge a partnership with Russia. Just 1 year earlier, President Putin had expressed interest in joining NATO during President Clinton's visit to Moscow. Clinton's exact response has not been publicly reported, but it was not affirmative. In retrospect, it was exactly the partnership the West needed to counter the rise of China. But Washington had spent the previous decade treating Russia as a colonized vassal. There was little interest in allowing such a backward and humiliated country into the gilded halls of NATO. Russia in the 1990s was a wreck. In the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia's government became a puppet state of America and the West, and its economy was a monumental disaster. People stopped getting paid. Monthly inflation was in the double digits. Life savings disappeared overnight. Banks disappeared overnight. The fertility rate plummeted along with life expectancy, with over 5 million excess deaths recorded over the decade, mostly deaths of despair. During post-Soviet privatization, large state enterprises were sold for pennies on the ruble to the politically well-connected, which is how most of the oligarchs acquired their fortunes. And politically well-connected Americans made fortunes in Russia as well. Wayne Mary, a U.S. official at the embassy in Moscow in the 1990s, said later, "We created a virtual open shop for thievery at a national level and for capital flight in terms of hundreds of billions of dollars, and the raping of natural resources and industries on a scale which I doubt has ever taken place in human history." It was against this backdrop that Putin rose to power. Funnily enough, when Yeltsin picked Putin as his presidential successor, he called Bill Clinton to get approval. Putin came to power with one burning desire: to make Russia great again and to keep it from ever being humiliated the way it was in the lost decade. Yes, so America exports democracy, and we've mentioned this word democracy before. What democracy means is that the good guys win. And who are the good guys? The elite, the 1%, the neocons and the neoliberals. They always win. Democracy also means that no country anywhere on earth will be allowed to keep its national customs, and that it must become gayer than gay. That is one of the rules for admission into the democratic club, that children as young as 5, and preferably even younger, must be propagandized with homosexual propaganda, trans propaganda, all the panoply of gender insanity. Because it's a unipolar world. Now, I ask the question, is Ukraine the 51st state? Because this word treason has been thrown around a lot lately. The United States is not at war in Ukraine. It's not at war in Ukraine. And yet apparently Tucker Carlson is a traitor for asking questions about this affair. This is from Summit News. Steve Watson. Tucker Carlson responded Monday to calls for his arrest after he covered the ongoing developments with US-run biolabs in Ukraine. Carlson specifically addressed the hosts of The View, who labeled him as a Russian propagandist, a foreign asset to a dictator, and accused him of helping Putin get away with criminal acts of civilians. Host Whoopi Goldberg declared they used to arrest people for doing stuff like this. Oh, well, what is she referring to? The anti-German panic at the time of America's entry into World War I and afterwards? The Palmer raids? I'm old enough to remember that Jane Fonda went to Hanoi during the Vietnam War at a time when American soldiers were being killed and sported about for the benefit of the North Vietnamese, and made it clear that she was on their side and not on America's side. I don't recall her being arrested. I recall her going from strength to strength. The existence of The View, and of course there are many shows which are similar to it, were for not particularly bright women blab on about subjects that they do not understand. The fact that this show is one of the most powerful news shows, if you like, in America is, well, it's representative of the way we live now. It's also, highly disconcerting, but this is the way we live. Tulsi Gabbard, American military veteran and former member of the House of Representatives, has also been called a traitor, or close to a traitor, including by that clown Mitt Romney, that rootless cosmopolite. Tulsi Gabbard went on Tucker Carlson's show tonight and lamented the fact that journalists keep getting away with talking about the fact that she acts like a Russian asset. She said it's a threat to democracy and calls for journalists to be held accountable and exposed. Again, I remember the Cold War, and I remember the 60s and 70s and 80s when there were constant calls, for nuance and for people to calm down. Well, apparently Russia is a much more serious threat to us than the Soviet Union ever was. I don't understand, but then I do understand. I do understand how this has happened. One reason being, look, here's a shiny object here, and it's making musical sounds, and it's bright. And stop looking. Stop looking at COVID-19. That really went J.G. Ballard, But let's not talk about that. It all worked out. It all worked out perfectly, actually. It all worked out perfectly. You can thank the vaccines for everything. Oh, you know that it's a commonplace for young people, even in their 20s, to get blood clots, potentially life-threatening blood clots. Well, you didn't know that? Have you not been apprised of the science? Of course, young people have also been threatened, always been threatened. People, men and women in their 20s, always been threatened by life-threatening blood clots. Come on, get with the program, people. Just the chutzpah, of these people. There's no end to it. Meanwhile, we've learned that Estonia is now talking for a no-fly zone. Yes, mighty Estonia has let the world know that what it needs is maybe World War III. Why anyone would particularly be interested in what Estonia had to say about this, I don't know. It ranks slightly below even Canada in terms of its importance on the world stage. It's a piece in the American Conservative by Bradley Devon. Estonia toys with World War II. Estonia's parliament endorses a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Someone should remind them of their place. Yes, indeed. And the modern history of the Ukraine is it's a troubled one. And it's very, very complicated, which leads to pieces like this one by Lee Smith in tabletmag.com. But Biden blames the Jews for his Ukraine policy. The president and his people tried to seal the deal on a new Iran deal by hanging their appeasement of Putin on Israel. Oh, so Biden's appeasing Putin. Wow, this is really, really complicated, isn't it? In the case of Ukraine, blaming the Jews might seem like a stretch. The Jewish state is a regional power, that would be Israel, in a region far from Ukraine. But senior Capitol Hill sources told the tablet that the Biden administration is trying to put Israel in the line of fire by pushing Jerusalem to mediate between Kiev and Moscow. The point is to position Israel to catch the blame if Putin doesn't relent, or the stubborn Ukrainians prove unwilling to surrender enough territory to end the war on terms that the Russian president find acceptable. Sources explain that the Israelis have reluctantly relayed messages between the two states, but don't want to get further involved for two reasons. First, with Russian forces on their Syrian border, the Israelis don't want trouble with Putin. Second, they see that the White House is setting them up for failure by forcing them into taking a stand against Putin. Team Biden's PR offensive blaming Israel for the failure of two-faced U.S. policy has included Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland. Boy, that woman is everywhere. Nuland's warnings to Jerusalem not to help hide dirty money belonging to Putin-allied oligarchs. But someone working for Joe Biden, father of Hunter Biden, could actually use the phrase dirty money. Well, the word chutzpah comes to mind once again. Nuland has also said that Israel should join the international sanctions regime targeting Russian assets, a regime that notably does not include world powers like China and India, which Nuland failed to mention. The administration's misdirection campaign also relied on Biden validators from the foreign policy establishment. Richard Haas and Aaron David Miller tweeted to the effect that if Israel wants to be an American ally, It should stand with America's values, embodied by its moral stance towards Russia, which includes impoverishing ordinary Russians by crashing the ruble. The coordinated operation to embroil Israel culminated in a story last week, pushed out by the White House's communications infrastructure inside Israel, whose lead publicist, Axios reporter Barak Ravid, proved his value during the Obama years. The story, which quickly went global, claimed that Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett urged Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to accept Putin's terms of surrender. A senior Ukrainian official claimed Bennett initiated the call, according to an account sourced to an anonymous Ukrainian official and given to Ravid. The source claimed that Bennett recommended Zelensky take the offer. Was the story true? The Ukrainian government said it was false and moved to correct the record the next day. Zelensky advisor Mikhail Podolyak wrote on Twitter that Israel did not push the Ukrainians to accept the concessions Putin demanded to end the invasion. But whether the surrender story is true or not, shouldn't the Israelis be openly and proudly pro-Zelensky? Ukraine's president has won the affection of decent and smart people the world over who have festooned their Facebook pages and Twitter feeds with the blue and yellow Ukrainian flag, and he's Jewish. Why doesn't Israel join in? The reality is that Israel has frequently stood up for Ukraine against Russia and with little to show for it. But the issue in this case is simple. The Russian military is on Israel's border, kind of like it was on Ukraine's border before it invaded. The difference is that the Russian-Ukrainian border is a geographical fact. Russia is only on Israel's border due to a geostrategic power play that Moscow implemented with the acquiescence of the U.S. political faction now trying to drive Israel toward conflict with Putin. And, so what's happening on the ground? Again, shouldn't we be better informed about this war than any other war in history? No. We are ill-informed about it, even more ill-informed than we were about the war in Vietnam. I'm old enough to remember, again, that there was a great deal of controversy about American media coverage of the war in Vietnam, with the Army and many politicians complaining that it was just bad news stories from the media, and this was affecting discipline. It was affecting military discipline. It was giving aid and comfort to the enemy. But now the media has decided, no. The news has to be pro-Ukrainian. It has to be, because they're the good guys. This is from Jackson Richmond at Mediaite. Fox News reporter Steve Harrigan returned from Ukraine with a grim message about the future of Ukraine, but also a prediction that the Russian people are going to rise up and overthrow Russian President Vladimir Putin. I think Putin is being bled, and he will be bled for years, and it will take years. Maybe the oligarchs who are making as much money will hurt. Maybe the Russian people will rise up, said Harrigan on America's Newsroom Monday. I think for me, Ukraine is a done deal. It's flattened and they lost. But the next story, I think, is Russia. The Russian people are going to rise up and throw this guy out. Okay. Knows what's going on in Russia, does he? Here's another fellow who is not very sunny on the prospects for the Ukrainians. This is from Don Serber at his blog spot. Ukraine is a done deal. It's flattened and they lost. It looks like retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor was right a week ago when he told a disbelieving Stuart Varney that Russia would take Ukraine. Macgregor said the first 5 days Russian forces, I think, frankly, were too gentle. They've now corrected that. So I would say another 10 days, this should be completely over. But the question is, what is it that Zelensky is going to do? The Russians have made it very clear what they want is a neutral Ukraine. This could have ended days ago if he accepted that, and then they can adjust the borders. But the eastern part of Ukraine is firmly in Russian hands. But again, the Russians are not seizing territory. They're destroying Ukrainian forces. That's their focus, unquote. His argument was that Zelensky should cut a deal, agree to keep Ukraine neutral in the NATO-Russia standoff, and give up some of the Russian-dominated eastern Ukraine. Macgregor did not see Zelensky as a hero. He said, a neutral Ukraine would be good for us as well as for Russia. It would create the buffer that, frankly, both sides want. But he's, I think, being told to hang on and try to drag this out, which is tragic for the people that have to live through this, unquote. And Liz Cheney called him part of the Putin wing of the GOP. Serber says, I guess I was in the Gaddafi wing when I opposed Hillary bombing Libya so she could prove her manhood. She valiantly said on TV, 5,000 miles away, we saw, he's dead. A few days later, so was her ambassador and 3 good soldiers because of her refusal to send troops to protect them from those seeking vengeance on the USA. Yes, there are a lot of brave people. A lot of brave people on the internet. It doesn't cost anything to be brave on the internet, not when you are saying what the narrative is. No, that's not brave at all. Someone who calls himself Mog the Urbanite or Enoch Powell on Twitter had a thread, aftermath footage from the missile attack on barracks of some of the volunteers. Looks like some Redditors got made into chutney. And there are messages, presumably Facebook or Instagram messages for someone called Spin Docto. Dude, I deleted all my posts because I didn't go to Ukraine for the clout. And he explains why he was there, and then he explains why he got the hell out. And there are unconfirmed reports that the International Brigade, who have decided to bug out, are not being allowed to leave, that their passports are being cut up, and they are being sent back to the front or dragged back to the front without any weapons. Again, I can't confirm this. That's just one of the things that I've come across. This is from Rachel Gilmore of the CSIS News Network, aka Global News. Justin Trudeau among 313 Canadians banned from Russia. The announcement came shortly after Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky addressed Canada's House of Commons, during which he repeated his call for a NATO-led no-fly zone over Ukraine. The list includes almost every single sitting member of parliament, save for a handful, such as Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who has already been banned from Russia, including the leaders of every major party. Reacting to the news that Trudeau had been banned from Russia, the Prime Minister's office said they won't be deterred from punishing Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. President Zelensky is a champion of democracy. Democracies around the world are lucky to have him as our champion. Was it meant to be that circular? Was it meant to sound that robotic? Again, democracy means doing the bidding of the global American empire. And that's all it means. This is a classic case of let's you and him fight. None of these people in Canada or the United States who are cheering on Zelensky are risking anything. Oh, wait. I guess we learned a couple of days ago from BuzzFeed or some such that, oh, yes, Azov Brigade, right sector, swastikas, Nazis. It's complicated. Yeah, that's what we were told. It's complicated. This is from Roberto Wakewell Cruz at the Post-Millennial. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland met with the co-founder of Ukraine's far-right fascist party. According to True North Center, Trudeau and Freeland met with Andriy Parubi, who served as the equivalent of the legislative speaker of the Ukrainian parliament from 2016 to 2019. Parubi's track record of flirting and outright embracing far-right Nazism spans back to the early 90s when he co-founded the Nazi-styled Social National Party of Ukraine. Political scientists and observers have criticized the party that includes openly racist rhetoric that is explicitly ethnocentric and spouts anti-Semitic ideas. The party was renamed the Svoboda Party in 2004 in an attempt to distance itself from Nazi imagery, although the party is still considered to be far-right and ultra-nationalist. Parubi's history of far-right and neo-Nazism includes founding the Patriot of Ukraine group, which was described by the nation as having formed the core of Azov, Ukraine's officially sanctioned neo-Nazi battalion. True North reports that there exist photos of Parubi marching in a Nazi-styled uniform as a young man, and one such photo was even featured on the front cover of a book alleged to be about white nationalism in Eastern Europe. Yes, but it's complicated. All right? It's terribly, terribly complicated. And let's see if the world is blown up yet. Drudge report, Zelensky center stage, EU leaders come to Kiev. Russians could buckle in 10 days. Yeah, we keep hearing that. Oil plunges, 2 Fox News journalists killed. Second gentleman, that would be Kamala Harris's husband, test positive for COVID, just like Barack Obama. Isn't pretty much everyone got it now? I can't keep up with the names of all the famous people who have been triple vaccinated, and yet they got it anyway. And you know what you got to do? You got to get another shot. Because, of course, because you got to get another shot. Got to keep that Pfizer stock up high. It hasn't been doing all that well lately. Let's take a look at antiwar.com. Romney, Gabbard is treasonous liar to mention Ukraine biolabs. No change for U.S. troops in Poland despite Russian missile strikes. Western neo-Nazis respond to Azov's call to arms for Ukraine. Ukraine-Russia talks on pause continue Tuesday. High-level U.S.-China talks in Rome focus on Russia-Ukraine. 49 GOP senators will oppose Iran nuclear deal. Iran foreign minister heads to Russia, blames U.S. for nuclear delays. Iran warns Iraq against threats from Iraqi soil. This is a story from the Libertarian Institute. White nationalist and neo-Nazi militants are flocking to Ukraine to help repel a Russian invasion, following a plea for foreign volunteers from President Vladimir Zelensky, according to a report in the Washington Post. Thousands of fighters have already arrived, many said to hold a shared vision for an ultranationalist ethno-state. But it wouldn't be your ethno-state, would it? Many of those hoping to join the fight in Ukraine are being recruited by the Mariupol-based Azov Battalion and other ethnic supremacist factions who've used their social media presence to bolster their ranks with foreign nationals. And let's take a look at the Twitter feed of Russians with Attitude, which, well, it hasn't been nuked yet, but let's see. Let's just confirm that. Still there. And Ukrainian fuel depot near Nikopol hit by Russian strike. Some shelling reported in the south of Odessa Oblast. Kaczynski was quoted as saying, yes, we absolutely need to start World War III to, Czech's notes, save Ukraine. This is from Visegrad 24, at a press conference in Kiev after tonight's meeting between President Zelensky and the prime ministers of Poland, Czechia, and Slovenia. The head of the Poland's ruling party, Yaroslav Kaczynski, said that an armed NATO peacekeeping mission is needed in Ukraine. So this meeting between Zelensky and the prime ministers of Poland, Czechia, and Slovenia, was this a real meeting or a virtual meeting? It'd be important, for us to know about that. Russians with Attitude says, with reference to the standing of Adolf Eichmann by a Ukrainian TV station, they're trying really hard to prove every single piece of Russian propaganda right. Channel 24 is a Ukrainian 24/7 TV channel, originally called News Channel 24. It's part of the Lux Television and Radio Company, a media conglomerate in Ukraine. Channel 24 programming covers politics, the economy, sports, and celebrities. It has been broadcasting continuously in Ukraine since 2006. It is owned by TRK Lux Media, which is controlled by Katerina Kit-Sadova, the wife of Lviv Mayor Andrei Sadovy. Yeah, nothing oligarchical about the way that the Ukraine is run. No, not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. I'm sure, of course, Lyndon Johnson, the president of the United States, somehow ended up with a bunch of very valuable TV licenses in America. But I'm sure that was just his business acumen and hard work. Let's look at the headlines from the Daily Mail. Zelensky says Ukraine must accept it won't join NATO in significant concession, but as the country has learned who our true friends are, as Kiev braces for 36 hours of hell under fresh Russian bombardments. There are repeated reports that the Azovites are not letting civilians leave these apartment buildings, making them human shields. And eventually the Russians are going to run out of patience. It's one thing for them to hole up in apartment buildings and government buildings and the like, so long as people who are not combatants are allowed to leave. But it's another thing if they are not. And civilians, non-combatants who die, well, this can be, the blame is theirs. The blame is the Azov Brigade, and it's Zelensky's fault. It's Zelensky's fault. Why wouldn't you want civilians to leave? Unless you're planning to make a burnt offering of them. And oh yes, ASB military, which was nuked by Twitter, has respawned on Gab, which was nice to see. And what's the latest from there? Oh, I mentioned this earlier. Ukrainian British mercenaries are running away from the front lines in Ukraine. Ukrainians are cutting up their passports and sending them back to the front lines with no weapons and no kit. A few days ago, 100 plus were killed in Russian precision strikes on the housing complexes of foreign mercenaries in Ukraine. Situational, this is from, 22 hours ago, but I'll repeat it anyway. Situational update from the Ukraine. We're hearing that destruction of Kharkov is Syria level. Ukrainian nationalists hide in apartment buildings, houses, schools, government buildings, basically any civilian structure you can imagine. They strike from those positions using NATO-supplied weapons and ATGMs, mainly along with snipers. They purposely keep the civilians in the buildings to use them as a cover. We've observed this in various other cities, mostly in all of them. They want to inflict as many civilian casualties as possible in hopes of stopping Russian forces from using artillery and aviation strikes, precision weapons. The Molotov tactic isn't observed in these cities, but we can expect that to go into effect in Kiev and Odessa. Mariupol clashes are bloody, intense, and lossy for the neo-Nazi battalions of the Ukrainian National Guard. Russia is utilizing a lot of drones and precision hits on fortified buildings, which kill dozens of Ukrainian personnel at once. And I think I've covered Pedro Gonzalez and Clint. Well, let's see if there's anything here from Clint Ehrlich. Again, one of the Twitter feeds which is actually interested in, providing information and not just agate prop. Leader of Poland's ruling party calls for NATO peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. After meeting with Zelensky, Yaroslav Kaczynski said the force of international troops should operate on Ukrainian territory. My take, he's advocating World War III. Why the Polish government would throw in their lot with the Banderites, that is a strange question. Maybe Poland is the 51st state. Ehrlich says, blue checks are claiming that I was groomed by Russia's government. They must be confusing the foreign ministry with the Lincoln Project. And this is Julia Davis makes this claim. Well, she's a columnist at the Daily Beast, Russian media analyst, and member of the Emmys and SAG-AFTRA. Wow, a real Renaissance woman she is. Warning to Western volunteers, Ukraine has an incentive to get you killed for propaganda purposes. They want Russia to kill Americans, so there'll be pressure for America to enter the war. Know what you're getting yourself into. It's a suicide mission. Jack Posobiec had tweeted, 2 more Americans in Ukraine describe what is going on with the Western volunteers and corroborate earlier reporting. Appears to be various elements of volunteers operating now, not only the one Ukrainian Legion. And, oh yes, let's hear from Glenn Greenwald. Russian invasion has elevated treason mania to never-before-seen heights. The crime of treason is one of the gravest an American citizen can commit, if not the gravest. It is one of the few crimes other than murder for which execution is still a permissible punishment under both U.S. federal law and the laws of several states. The framers of the U.S. Constitution were so concerned about the temptation to abuse this term by depicting political dissent as a criminal betrayal of one's country that they chose to define and limit how this crime might be applied by inserting this limiting paragraph into the Constitution itself. Quote, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. Treason was the only crime to be explicitly defined and limited by the founders because they sought to guard against the historic use of treason prosecutions by repressive governments to silence otherwise legitimate political opposition. For that reason, treason has rarely been prosecuted in the United States. According to the FBI, the U.S. government has successfully convicted fewer than 12 Americans for treason in the nation's history. During the War on Terror and invasion of Iraq, neocons routinely accused war opponents and skeptics of their anti-terrorism, civil liberties assaults of being traitors. David Frumm's stint as Bush White House speechwriter enshrined this patriotism attack as his and their specialty. Bush and Cheney's speeches, especially leading up to the invasion of Iraq, the 2002 midterms, and then the 2004 re-election campaign inevitably featured innuendo, if not explicit complaints, that Americans opposed to their war policies were against America and on the side of the terrorists, i.e. traitors. The Lincoln Project's Rick Wilson produced a campaign ad for the 2002 Georgia Senate race, morphing the face of Democratic incumbent Max Cleland, who lost 3 limbs in Vietnam, into Osama bin Laden's. Upon leaving the White House, Frum continued to build his career on impugning the patriotism and loyalty of anyone, right, left, or in between, who opposed all the various wars he wanted to send other people's children to go fight and die in. Oh, and here we have John O'Brien, the world's angriest and perhaps ugliest Irishman, ranting on about treasonous Republicans. And, many such cases. Here's the exact quotation from Mitt Romney. Tulsi Gabbard is parroting false Russian propaganda. Her treasonous lies may well cost lives. How so? How so? There are biolabs there. Victoria Nuland testified to that under oath in Congress. And now there's talk about a false flag or the Russians releasing dangerous pathogens. Why they would want to do that when they would be killed themselves, interesting question. Greenwald says Romney's endorsement of this treason accusation seemed to have given the green light to liberals to reveal their true authoritarian selves in all of their grotesque naked darkness. On Monday, the hosts of ABC's The View, led by Ana Navarro, demanded that Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson be criminally investigated by the Department of Justice over the views about the war in Ukraine. On Twitter, Navarro reaffirmed her call for a criminal investigation of the pair, arguing that persons engaged in domestic, political, or advocacy work on behalf of foreign principals are engaged in a crime absent FARA disclosures. An odd view for someone whose career began by pressuring the U.S. Congress to fund and support Nicaragua's death squads used by the Contras, of which her father was a member. The discredited and fired former FBI agent Peter Strzok suggested that the two were involved in some form of sinister coordination. Ana Navarro is a completely ridiculous person, and she is living proof of why it is a bad idea to get involved in foreign wars, because you end up with people like Ana Navarro, or she now styles herself Ana Navarro Cardenas, and who describes herself as a proud Nicaraguan American. And she was not much of anything before she became never Trump. And that's all she is. That's all she has now. But, yes, American politics has been disfigured in recent decades, in Florida in particular. How anti-Nicaraguan government are you? How anti-Castro are you? What this has to do with Americans, I don't know, really. And I would have thought that would have died out, but apparently not. And, okay, I already talked about that. The incels are coming. The incels are coming, and I don't know if you're scared, but I am. I'm trying hard to keep it together, as the young people say, but I don't know. The news is so horrific that I don't know. I may break down. This is from Nicole Skanga at CBS News. The federal government Tuesday released a study on the growing terrorism threat from men who call themselves anti-feminists or involuntary celibates and draw motivation from violence from their inability to develop relationships with women. Since 2014, attacks inspired by the incel movement and spanning the US and Canada have left dozens dead. Yeah. And these are terrorist attacks. Exactly how? Of course, there is the supreme gentleman, Elliot Roger, who killed a bunch of people at Isla Vista, in California. Was that near Santa Barbara? I think. I have read a great deal about Elliot Roger, and he was caught between two stools ethnically. He was hopeless with women. Well, he didn't even make the effort. He actually killed a bunch of Asian people. Yeah, 4 men and 2 women. They were all UC Santa Barbara students. He hated women because apparently it was their job to run up to him and ask, do you want to go out with me, have sex with me, or whatever. And he hated men because some of them associated with women. Again, I do not understand how this is seen as a terrorist attack as opposed to, an obvious nutcase attack. But the incels, they're coming. They're relentless. They won't be stopped. That thing that you'd never heard of until a couple of years ago is now one of the greatest threats to our way of life. Rachel Emmanuel has a very interesting piece at the Western Standard site, westernstandardonline.com, why I left the mainstream media for the Western Standard. I was told to stop giving a platform to voices that oppose mandatory vaccines and lockdowns because such views represent just a radical and small minority of Canadian society. So much for journalists being a voice for the voiceless. They don't really say that anymore, right? Because that would be stupid, because they are not a voice for the voiceless. I've yet to speak publicly about the events that led to my sudden departure from iPolitics after an editor altered my article following pressure from Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland's office. You see how all these stories are connected? For the record, Freeland was photographed holding a banner that had links to Stepan Bandera, the leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, whose followers acted as local militia members for the SS and the regular German army, and his branding has since been repurposed by neo-Nazis. But after reading the article in its current form, post-Freeland pressure, you'd think the Deputy Prime Minister was pictured near a scarf that coincidentally shared the red and black colors that have at times been associated with Bandera. Never mind the photo evidence of her holding the banner, which is emblazoned with Bandera's colors and slogan. And maybe Freeland didn't see what she was holding, or she didn't know its muddled history, but the hypocrisy of a federal politician refusing to own her mistake just weeks after condemning conservatives for attending the truckers' convoy where an unidentified man carried a Nazi flag seemed at least noteworthy. This wasn't the first time I'd received pushback for my work from within my editorial team, or the first time changes were made to words published under my name that I did not agree with or even have prior knowledge of. It also wasn't the reason I left the mainstream media to work for an independent company, the Western Standard. And she gives more evidence of this. When I wrote about a federal MP who was concerned about restrictions on mobility rights, editors mischaracterized my work as being anti-vax and anti-science. I was told to stop giving a platform to voices that oppose mandatory vaccines and lockdowns because such views represent just a radical and small minority of Canadian society. All of this took place under the backdrop of a society paralyzed by government overreach that seeped into every sphere of public and private life. In the name of public safety, businesses have been shuttered, unvaccinated employees fired, cancer screenings missed, surgeries canceled, opioid-related deaths spike, our youths fantasize about killing themselves, and many do. Oh, yes. As you know, I hold no brief for Ezra Levant, but he was it 3-4 years ago? He was essentially canceled in Canada. And you're not allowed to have anything to do with him. There are still some that do, but it's really obvious to see what is going on with this story by the egregious Doug Sanders. at the Globe and Mail. The Christchurch massacre had a Canadian connection, but there's a reason you may not know about it. And he talks about 51 people who were killed at a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, by a far rightist. And it turns out that this fellow made a donation in 2017 of $106.68 from his personal bank account to Rebel News Network Limited of Canada using PayPal. Around the same time, he made donations to organizations such as the neo-Nazi publisher Daily Stormer and the white supremacist organization Generation Identity. Now, Israel Levant, according to the story, launched a series of libel suits against journalists who had mentioned his organization's possible influence on terrorists and violent individuals and groups. That included a suit against the author of this column for having mentioned the terrorist donation to Rebel Media on Twitter after it appeared in the New Zealand Report. Without having seen the pieces that are the cause of Ezra Levant's defamation suits, I really can't comment except to say that Ezra Levant is fearsomely litigious. And in a situation like this, it doesn't seem prudent. But you see, Ezra Levant apparently believes in all sorts of terrible, terrible things. That, yes, the Great Replacement, which holds that people in Western countries from racial or religious minorities are not simply fellow citizens, but the subject of a plot to replace white and Christian people. White genocide. The Christchurch terrorist was an admitted admirer of an Austrian fellow called Martin Zellner. And there's some consanguinity there to Ezra Levant. Somehow, this is what's going on, okay? The Proud Boys, which is a harmless organization, is banned in Canada as a terrorist organization. And the move is on here from Doug Saunders on others to have Rebel Media banned as a terrorist or terrorist supporting organization. As previously mentioned in this space, when the Unabomber's cabin was found and searched, a copy of Al Gore's Earth in the Balance was found. And Kaczynski spent a lot of time with this book, and it was marked up and underlined. And some stupid people suggested that Al Gore was somehow responsible for the outrages of the Unabomber, which he was not. There is nothing in Earth in the Balance which suggests sending mail bombs to people. But the left plays this consanguinity game without end. He's connected to this person, who's connected to this person, and then to you. So therefore, you need to be silenced. If the consanguinity game were to be played with many people in the Canadian media to look at their links to say, Antifa, that would be interesting. But we're not going to see that. And let's go back to the chat here. Let's go back to the chat. Okay, here we are. Costner isn't terrible. He is just so bland. Fandango was a fun movie, says Anne Run. Anne Run says, I just find her face too harsh, and she was pretty much a brunette in Body Heat. Are we talking about Kathleen Turner here? Okay. I'm sorry, who donated to what? The Christchurch mass killer gave $107 to Rebel Media, Ezra Levant's organization. Don Willis says, Ezra accused of many things, probably guilty of some, but I like him. Palcasso 88 says, I can't abide Madonna, but the bit in Truth or Dare where she mocks Costner for saying her concert was funny. I don't understand why any self-respecting man would identify as incel, says British American. Why not MGTOW if they must label themselves? Incel is such a self-own, as the kids are saying. Well, it's the sort of thing one gets called. It's not the sort of thing that one would call oneself, right? I mean, there's all of these people, the crazy people with blue hair or shaved heads or whatever, who talk about how they are Well, they don't have sex, right? They could go on and on about how they don't have sex. That's their sexual identity. But that is, glorious and liberating, etc., etc. Aaron says, as much as I like body heat, Kathleen Turner did next to nothing to me. Not my type. Lovely voice, very sexy voice, which she deployed to great effect on both The Simpsons and King of the Hill. I like that she designed Stacy, and she was married to Dr. Colossus and G.I. Joe, and that was funny. That was very funny. You can stop us with state-mandated girlfriends, says Yo Mama. Of course, that reminds me of the old Marine Corps joke. If the Marines wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one. Yes, with excellent supporting work from Richard Crenna, who is always good. Ted Danson, yes. Not a fan of the Big Chill, though. Ugh. Don't blame me for that. Yes, I'm a boomer. But no, I had nothing to do with that. Kevin Costner was cut out of that movie, was he not? Hello to Clownvelt. I liked John Candy's Ed Asner and SCTV's People's Global Golden Choice Awards, a great parody of award shows. He was cold cocked by David Thomas's Bob Hope. I just loved when they were singing the theme songs, including the one for Absence of Malice. And all the songs were being sung by the Five Neat Guys, some doo-wop group from the 60s. Absence of Malice. I nearly fell over when I heard that. We're talking about Suzanne Summers here. Yeah. That's Lou Grant on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and then there actually being a TV show called Lou Grant, about Lou Grant as a serious newsman and not a cuddly, gruff joke. They did weird things back in the 1970s. The nuclear apocalypse should make some fine TikToks, says our Finnish friend Jaakko Raipala. What are your thoughts on Finland joining NATO? I'll ask our Finnish friend Gamion. Hello, says, who else feels enraged by the looming tax day and having to pay huge taxes so that our hostile, immoral, and inhuman elites can fund the killing of Slavs by Slavs, Russians by Russians? Hello to David Wright. Emmett Kelly's Earth, as FDR said of Somoza, he's an SOB, but he's our SOB. Well, to the neocons, the Azov Battalion may be Nazis, but they're Nazis. Hello to Contra Coup. I love Entenmann's raspberry strudel warmed with butter and a tall glass of milk, says William Hicks. It's good KMG, keeps the show clean so my mom can listen, says Helper. Yeah, I pretty much eliminated all swearing. Occasionally, I'll use it if it's necessary to understand the vehemence. Jaakko Rapala says these tiny Eastern European countries are just eager to score points with the U.S. State Department, which runs the countries anyway. Last year, mighty Lithuania wanted war with China and got screwed. William Hicks says, Kevin, do you think there's a good possibility the U.S. has weapons of mass destruction in those Ukrainian labs, and they don't want anyone to know about it? Weapons of mass destruction? You're talking about pathogens? I think there's a very good chance. Well, because if you're going to do, dirty deeds done dirt cheap, you'd want to go to the Ukraine, wouldn't you? That is the Wild West. That is the country where anything and everything goes. You just grease enough palms and you can do whatever you want. Nakarapala says of Finland joining NATO, bad idea. Cynically, I'm expecting Finland to join and NATO to collapse within a few years. It would fit with our track record, allying with Germany in 19 and then allying with Germany in 1941. I don't know whether you heard this, but I reviewed The Unknown Soldier last Friday, a wonderful movie about the continuation war. Dan likes the Five Neat Guys. I remember one of the commentaries where Eugene Levy was saying that it was only in the playback that Eugene Levy noticed that Joe Flaherty was playing his neat guy as just so plastered that he could barely stand up. And he thought that was very funny, which indeed it is. Nick Fuentes repeatedly calls himself an incel now, says my trail of disgrace. Yeah, okay, maybe he's being ironic. And let's see. Oh, yeah. We care so much about Ukraine. How about our own cities? I've talked at great length about how Victoria is falling apart very quickly. And this is from Newsweek. Thomas Kika, or Kika. Amazon announced Friday that it has decided to relocate office staff in downtown Seattle due to a sustained uptick in violent crime, with other businesses in the area opting to stick with remote work for the same reason. The location that office workers are being moved from employs about 1,800 people, the company confirmed to Como News. However, it is currently unclear how many are being relocated, as many have continued to work remotely since the start of the pandemic 2 years ago. The spike in the city's violent crime hit a new peak March 2nd when 15-year-old Michael Del Bianco was shot and killed at the intersection of 3rd Avenue and Pike Street, which is where Amazon's office building is located. In order to address the issues plaguing the area, the Seattle Police Department set up a mobile precinct at the intersection and increased its number of patrolling bike cops. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell's office said in a statement that the mayor is working every day to make downtown a safe and thriving place for residents, workers, and businesses by getting rid of the scum, of the chuds. I very much doubt whether he is doing that. Very much doubt it indeed. I see the mayor of Seattle is a HAPA. And strangely, for a prominent politician in Washington, Oregon, he does not appear to be homosexual. I thought that was a law now. And yes, Seattle, it's a real shame what has happened to that city. But here's some good news. Positive power of government. This is from Chris Tomlinson at Breitbart. Hungary has seen a 5.5% increase in births since last year after the country enacted pro-family policies. State Secretary for Family and Youth Affairs, Katalin Novak, announced Thursday that Hungary has seen a rise in both the number of births and a 5% rise in the fertility rate in the first 4 months of this year compared to the same period in 2019. Good news again, she stated, adding that marriages have also increased, with 1.5 more marriages recorded this year compared to the previous year. This story is terribly edited. The report comes after Hungary passed pro-family legislation last year that included a family protection action plan, which increased government spending on families by 224 billion Hungarian forints, or 619 million pounds. Europe is at a crossroads. Western Europe seeks to address the problem of democracy with simple solutions, which only offer short-term success but convey catastrophic consequences in the long run. What we need is not numbers, but Hungarian children. We're not seeking to sustain an economic system, but Hungary, the Hungarian nation, and Hungarian history. We want to encourage the continuation of our families for several generations, the spokesman added. I don't know that this would work in Canada or the United States, or maybe even in England, because they're not really nations anymore, are they? Whereas Hungary is a nation. Oh, liberal Tory, same old story. I am not a fan of Pierre Poilievre. If you go to his Twitter feed, if you go to his sites, I was, okay, what's the policy here? What do you got going on for your campaign themes? Nothing. He's just dribbling it out bit by bit. I know of this fellow. He's very good in the House of Commons. He's a very sharp debater, at least in bits. But what does he stand for? Free enterprise. Yep, that's it. That's it. Oh, also choice. Choice is the highest value. Not community, not nation, but choice. He vows to make Canada the freest country in the world. I have no idea what that might mean. But a hilarious story from John Paul Tasker at CBC News. Poilievre, I should mention, is running for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. And another candidate is Creepy Patrick Brown, mayor of Brampton, Ontario. Conservative leadership candidate Patrick Brown launched an assault Monday on his opponent Pierre Poilievre, accusing the Conservative MP of supporting discriminatory policies that target immigrants. Poilievre, the MP for the Ottawa area riding of Carleton, considered the frontrunner in the race, pitched new policies Monday. He vowed to take on what he called money-grabbing gatekeepers. You know what this means? He wants, well, immigrants, lots and lots and lots of immigrants, as many as Trudeau. He hasn't spoken out against Trudeau's insane numbers. Nope, he hasn't. What does he have to say? I am and continue to be a strong supporter of immigration and equality, including with my announcement today to fast-track approval from immigrant professionals and tradespeople to work in high-paying jobs. Yeah, do you want your doctor to be from Guinea-Bissau? I don't want my doctor to be from Guinea-Bissau. Do you want your engineers to be from, I don't know, Moldova? No, I don't, actually. The Conservative Party or elements of it have been pushing this idea for years and years, despite the fact that it is provincial, not federal jurisdiction. Nope, we need to have foreigners dominate the professions now in Canada. That's what all of these people are saying. That I don't see any kind of loyalty to Canadian community at all from Pierre Poilievre. But they're carrying on about the so-called niqab ban of 2015, which wasn't a niqab ban. The government had said that when people were being sworn in as citizens, they would need to show their face, which apparently terribly controversial. But everyone's apologizing for it now. And Poilievre is in effect calling Brown a racist, and Brown is calling Poilievre a racist, because that's what conservatives do. They call everyone else a racist. Brown is very good at getting Sikhs and others to sign up as members. And seeing it is largely Sikhs that decide who become party leaders in my country, I would tend to think that he will win. He will become conservative leader. Of course, there's just going to be, everyone is going to be accusing everyone else of cheating. They always do in these ridiculous votes where you only get one vote and it's a ranked ballot, which is a cretinous idea. And it typically ends up with a candidate who gets, somewhere between 20 to 25% of the vote, winning the contest. They say, the multiple ballots. They're not multiple ballots. There's just one ballot. And of course, we have computers now, which are really fast now, so we could count them all at once. But now we go through this farce of saying, it'll be about an hour and a half to have the results of the second ballot. No, there's no second ballot. Oh, yes. Poilievre says, I'm running for prime minister to put Canadians back in control of their lives by making this the freest country in the world. And that freedom includes freedoms for immigrants to have the chance to put their talents and skills to work in the fields for which they were trained. So Canadians are free by having their jobs taken by foreigners. However, right now, a government gatekeeper and regulatory bodies block newcomers from getting licenses to practice, even when they are qualified. Often the wait time is in the neighborhood of 18 months. That is such a shame. During that time, newcomers to Canada are forced to accept poverty wages while all the rest of the country is forced to accept labor shortages in key sectors, then train Canadians for those jobs. I don't know whether Poilievre knows this, but countries like such as India are full of degree factories. Yeah, they're completely phony. And of course, definitely one wants Canadian professions increasingly dominated by people who can't speak English or French, because that makes total sense. Poilievre then announced a plan to open up the gates of opportunity to our newcomers to earn bigger paychecks, serving the desperately needed positions that are empty in our economy, because we're not training Canadians for those jobs. Poilievre's plan include incentives for provincial governments to mandate a maximum 60-day wait time for the professional and trades bodies to give a final decision on whether a new immigrant is qualified to work in a field and get the license to do so. Poilievre said that those who are deemed not qualified would be given a path to licensing. Second, he said that he would change the recognition of credentials away from trying to match up curricula with universities around the world to one based on merit, with clear testing and exams. He said that immigration settlement money would be paid out at the moment that the province gives a license to practice to a new immigrant, and that a Poilievre government would work with regulated trade professions to create modules for immigrants to work on before they even arrive in Canada. He's going to bribe the provinces to do this. Because again, this is not a federal jurisdiction. This is provincial jurisdiction. But people like Poilievre do not believe in provincial jurisdictions. They think it should be one size fits all for the whole of this country. And, no, Canada is backsliding on refugees, according to PR spiv Robin Sears. We cannot return to the contemptible policies of our past. Canada's nakedly racist immigration policies are not ancient history. It was only in the 1970s that they were finally wound down as policy, though the color blindness of some immigration officials was never believable. The department is currently under investigation for allegations of years of systemic racism. Canada had a racist screening system that was thinly veiled as geographic quotas only 50 years ago. Our quotas in those days permitted 1,000 immigrants per year from Asia and 100 times that from Europe. Sounds pretty good to me. In recent years, we won a global reputation for the openness and fairness of both our immigration and refugee screening processes. No, we've become an international joke because almost anyone can get into this country, and once they do, it's almost impossible to get rid of them. 50 years ago, Canada was a unified country with no racial problems. Now it is a balkanized country, which is rife with racial problems. And we have something like Eric Zemmour talks about in France, this kind of new Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, where the left gets together with the immigrants, and we can add the Indians to talk about how Canada is an awful place. It's always been an awful place. It always will be an awful place because of evil white people. Our immigrants, there are some exceptions. From the moment that they get off the plane at Vancouver International or Pearson, they talk about how horrible white people are. The Trudeau government pledged that we would admit 40,000 Afghan refugees. Why? Why? Does Robin Sears want to live in little Kabul? I don't want to. We know what we're going to get from this. We're going to get gangs, and we are going to get rapes. We are going to get honor rapes and honor killings. That's what happens when you bring Afghanistan to your country. But Robin Sears, I suppose, didn't get to be one of Canada's top PR spivs without understanding elite desire, and its elite desire to destroy what remains of Canada. Oh, yes. In the Diversity is Our Strength file, this is from Wallace Snowden at the CBC. Notorious inner-city landlord Abdullah Shah was fatally shot outside his Edmonton home late Sunday. Homicide detectives are investigating. Shah, 59, was found injured outside a home in the area of Heath Road and Riverbend about 10 p.m. He was taken to the hospital where he died. Investigators remained outside the home at 374 Heath Road Monday morning. The two-story home is owned by Shaw. Let's see. Last August, Shaw was shot in the jaw at one of his inner-city properties, but recovered after a stay in hospital. Shaw, also known as Carmen Pervez, once said he owned about 100 properties across the city. He has a criminal record going back to 1983, including drug and mortgage fraud convictions, and has been the subject of numerous Edmonton Police Service investigations. So this raises the question of whether he was shot to death because he was such a notorious landlord, or whether this was gang-related. And I suppose it could be both. No reason why it couldn't be both. There's a essay in American Greatness by Julie Kelly, which I commend to you highly. It is called From 15 Days to 2 Years. The date of March 16th, 2020 isn't just a day that will live in infamy and mark the beginning of the largest crime against humanity since the last World War. On Saturday morning, my daughter in college texted me, "I got sent home 2 years ago today. Feels like a dream." After I responded, she sent an uncharacteristically brief reply, sad, to say the least. In March 2020, once free citizens around the world surrendered their liberty and livelihoods in a futile attempt to stop a virus. The most technologically advanced civilization in the history of mankind quickly adopted medieval fixes that bordered on quackery, sold by snake oil salesmen in the credential class and news media, codified through executive fiat by elected leaders of both parties. Just 15 days, we were told on March 16, 2020, to slow the spread. Do your part to promote the common good, the historical rallying cry of every wannabe despot, or be branded a heartless heretic. And it worked, far better than the original architects probably anticipated. On the same day, my daughter left her college dormitory in upstate New York, not to return to a normal campus life for 2 years. I posted this on Twitter. Quote, "This is what the left wants. They want people stripped of wealth, isolated, and terrified. They want sources of joy, church, sporting events, vacations, large social gatherings eliminated. This is how they get control, and it's far scarier than any virus," unquote. To say that that was a very unpopular view at the time would be an understatement, but having covered the climate change movement for years, I recognized a familiar approach to the spread of COVID-19 hysteria, using flawed data to whip up a public frenzy and shut down all debate in fealty to science. I suppose the question now is, are they going to get away with it? And of course, we're supposed to believe the American government and the media about what's happening in Ukraine, despite the fact that they have spent the last 6 years lying to us about everything, lying about Trump's campaign and that it was being spied on, lying about Trump stealing the election or Putin stealing the election in 2016, lying that the Black Lives Matters riots were mostly peaceful protests, lying about how dangerous COVID-19 was, lying about the efficacy and safety of viruses, and now retailing outrageous lies about what is going on in Ukraine. No, but trust them. Trust them this time. Oh, yes, more viruses. More vaccines. Hard to tell the difference somehow. Steve Watson at Summit News. Health dictator Anthony Fauci declared Monday that Americans will need to take more COVID vaccines just a day after the CEO of Pfizer proclaimed that a fourth shot is needed immediately. In an interview with CNBC, Fauci was asked how many more shots will be needed and responded, the answer is, we don't know. I mean, that's it. It is likely that we're not done with this when it comes to vaccines. The comments dovetail with those of Albert Bourla, who said Sunday it is necessary a fourth boost right now. I wonder how many people actually know that jab number 4 is exactly the same as jab number 3, number 2, and number 1. Do people know this? I suspect that most people don't. Could be wrong, but that's my guess. Let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Substack. On Sunday, Kyrie Irving decided, Kyrie? Who knows? Decided to watch a basketball game in Brooklyn, and I'll help broke loose. In case you don't know, Irving plays basketball for the Brooklyn Nets. He's very good. He's also an odd duck. He made news in 2018 for saying he thought the earth might be flat. Last year, Irving decided he needed time off midseason because he was sad about police shootings of African Americans. This season, Irving has been in the news for a different source, his refusal to be jabbed with mRNA. As a fellow pureblood, I am on Irving's side, and unlike Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers, Irving owned his choice. He said he wasn't vaccinated and wasn't getting vaccinated at the end, only it wasn't. The NBA and his players had agreed COVID shots would not be mandatory. Professional athletes have unions nearly as strong as teachers, but New York City had other ideas. And so it was banned. Irving was due to make $35 million this season, just shy of $400,000 a game. Thus, every home game he missed cost him $400,000. And I thought I was committed to staying unvaccinated, though the team still had to pay Irving for the road games. So he could play in the road games, but not in Brooklyn. Then it turned out that he could go and see the games as a spectator, but couldn't play in them. Because that all makes such tremendous sense, right? I don't know. How long before this new mayor, Eric Adams of New York City, how long before he's as hated as Bill de Blasio? Is this possible? China seems to be succumbing to COVID-19. Berenson writes, zero COVID now means more COVID later. The clearest proof yet of the failure of lockdowns and zero COVID as a long-term strategy against the coronavirus is now unfolding in Hong Kong. The territory is suffering the worst coronavirus epidemic anywhere since New York City in April 2020. For 2 weeks straight, Hong Kong has had the equivalent of 10,000 American deaths a day. The breakdown comes off almost 2 years after Hong Kong tried everything possible to keep COVID out, including aggressive contact tracing, border controls, and rules on gatherings that damaged its economy, made residents miserable, and drove away expatriates. Now, SARS-CoV-2 is catching up all at once, even though Hong Kong is highly vaccinated. Since the beginning of March, the city, which has 7.4 million residents, has had over 3,500 COVID deaths. When zero COVID goes bad, and apparently a whole city, a whole megacity in China has been shut down, it's difficult for us to know what is going on at China at any time. But now there's fears that China is going to, because of this, is going to, wreck the world economy even more than it has been wrecked of late. I wanted to talk a little about Jussie Smollett. That it's tempting to laugh at this man, and he is a risible figure. As we found out last week, he was sentenced to 150 days in jail, of which he will only at maximum serve 75, assuming he behaves himself. 30 months probation and something like about $120,000 in restitution for his fake hate crime. I went to Wikipedia just to reacquaint myself with some of the details, and I noticed that the account of this has been sanitized. The fact that Jussie Smollett left his Chicago apartment on the coldest day of the year after 2 o'clock in the morning, well, it must have been an emergency, right? No, he went to Subway to get a sandwich, which is not something a sane person or any person would do at 2:15 in the morning on the coldest day of the year. Now, the story that Jussie Smollett told, it never made any sense. I never believed it from the beginning, but I've become rather reflexive about this. Hate crimes? No, sorry. They're all fake, or almost all of them. That one of the assumptions, of course, was that two white rednecks would know who Jussie Smollett was. Oh, yes, he was on the show called Empire, which was about some sort of family hip-hop empire, and that's the sort of thing that show the white rednecks watch, right? But what I find fascinating about this case is that Jussie Smollett and his family, and they're not the only ones, seem to have memed this into reality. Such is the discrimination against Black people, again, homosexuals, and especially Black homosexuals, and he is half Jewish. Now, Jews are not exactly discriminated against in show business, and they are rather successful in America, but that gets thrown in there occasionally as well. I really believe that Jussie Smollett has memed himself into believing that this attack happened. You know, it's not a lie if you believe it, as George Costanza famously said. And similarly, I think that his family members, all of whose Christian names begin with the letter J, and I guess once they started, they couldn't Stop. His parents are called Joel and Janet, and his brothers and sisters are called Jake, Jockey. Is it? I don't know, but it's spelled Jocqui, Jojo, Journey, which is spelled Jurnee, and Jazz. I think that they have all persuaded themselves that this attack happened. And one of the reasons for this is that you will have noticed going back 10 years, 20 years, when any one of these hate hoaxes is busted, typically a university administrator or the like will say, well, okay, it didn't happen. But America's the kind of place where this sort of thing happens every day. Oh, okay. Well, it's the sort of thing that actually happens every day. Perhaps we can ignore or turn on the people who are responsible for hate hoaxes. And the argument is made that America is so wicked in this regard, anti-Black, anti-homosexual, misogynist, or whatever, that people feel the need to do these things, to engineer these hate hoaxes. That's how broken they are by American wickedness. It's arguable that these hate hoaxes are responsible for bloodshed, for beatings, robbings, rapes, murders. Because you hear about the hate hoaxes, but the Jussie Smollett case is a rare example of whether of one that was busted savagely in public. This doesn't happen very often. I've seen interviews of his various family members, and they are furious. They're bursting into tears or close to tears. Their voice is shaking because here's not a family member, but a Black actress who played his mother in Empire. Let's drag Emmett Till into this. Emmett Till was actually brutally beaten and murdered savagely. That actually happened. What he has to do with Jussie Smollett, except the fact that Emmett Till was Black and Jussie Smollett is, well, half Black. They don't really seem to have much else in common. But this is a woman called Taraji P. Henson, who said Emmett Till was brutally beaten. No, hang on. I am not here to debate you on his innocence, but we can agree that the punishment does not fit the crime. Emmett Till was brutally beaten and ultimately murdered because of a lie, and none of the people involved with his demise spent one day in jail. Even after Carolyn Bryant admitted that her claims were false, no one was hurt or killed during Jussie's ordeal. He has already lost everything in all caps, exclamation point. To me, as an artist, not able to create that in itself is punishment enough. He can't get a job. Well, maybe he should lower his sights. No one in Hollywood will hire him. And again, as an artist who loves to create, that is prison. My prayer is that he is freed and put on house arrest and probation, because in this case, that would seem fair. And there's an obligatory picture of Emmett Till. And that happened a long time ago. Long time ago. But as Steve Saylor likes to point out, it seems to get ever closer. Maybe it happened yesterday, or maybe it happened tomorrow. And yes, here's Jussie Smollett, who is very, very angry about this, and he's being housed in. At the time he was convicted, he jumped up, gave the Black Power salute, said that he was not suicidal, that he's clearly putting himself up there with Jeffrey Epstein, who was a monster. I don't think people are calling Jussie Smollett a monster, but he seems to believe that he's such an important person and that his truth, his journey is so important that people are going to try to kill him in prison as a result of it. TMZ reported that Smollett told his attorneys before his Thursday court appearance that he would get a harsher sentence than most people convicted of a nonviolent offense because he is black, calling it proof of systemic racism in the court system. I think that Smollett, that he cracked because of stories similar to his own. Now, one could say that Smollett, who had a part on a network TV show and had a music career. His music career wasn't all that successful, but certainly much more successful than most Americans. But I guess he wasn't successful enough. That he should have been as successful as, I don't know, Jay-Z or Will Smith. And the fact that he wasn't meant that, of course, that he was a victim of racism and homophobia, and perhaps also anti-Semitism. Steve Saylor writes on his blog that Jussie Smollett did America a favor. I'm not so sure about that, actually. Steve Saylor believes that perhaps we're going to get over hate hoaxes, or at least accept how ubiquitous they are because of this story. I'm not so sure. The people who want to believe it are going to believe it. And the people who believe that Jussie Smollett is yet another victim of the man, and of course the man is going to keep the black man down. The white man's going to keep the black man down. They're going to just see this as another example. And they're going to be further enraged because of the laughter that has been directed at Jussie Smollett, and in many cases of his supporters. It seems that the whole of, Black American elite came to his defense after he told a story to the cops that was obviously false. Because, of course, black men all over America are being attacked on the streets by white people identifying themselves as supporters of Donald Trump, saying that this is MAGA country. Yeah, Chicago, the upscale neighborhood of Chicago is MAGA country. I'll point you to a website, a useful website called fakehatecrimes.org. The purpose of the site is to compile a comprehensive database of the false reports of hate crimes committed mostly in the USA. It builds on the work of Laird Wilcox, whose Crying Wolf is the original book on this subject. The books Hate Crime Hoax and Hate Crimes, Criminal Law and Identity Politics are recommended, as are the websites Watching the What Dogs and Fake Hate Map. Finally, before I sign off for today, I want to talk about an essay that appears in Spiked by Patrick West. It's called The Tyranny of Emotion. And there's a picture of, this could be Nancy Pelosi. The neck would certainly match it. And the expensive jewelry around the neck. And the flag pin, Ukrainian flag pin. It's often been said that we live in an age of emotionalism and feeling. We in the UK became aware of this development after the death and funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales in 1997. An event which solidified our society's transition from the stiff upper lip to one in which we felt free to express our feelings. Some thought this a good thing, others were suspicious of this sanctification of emotion and our consequential inability and unwillingness to deploy dispassionate reason. Another event of the 90s, the NATO bombing of the rump Yugoslavia in 1999, also illustrated this development. Something must be done was the cry from those urging humanitarian intervention. This cry begged the obvious question, what if doing something, anything, actually made things worse? Then came the invasion of Iraq in 2003. As the prospect of intervention loomed, millions gathered in the streets under placards reading, "Not in my name." While something must be done and "Not in my name" epitomized pro-war and anti-war sentiment respectively, they both sprang from the same font, the triumph of the subjective, self-regarding self now governed by sentiment. Fast forward to today's events, and we have similar voices speaking more from the heart than from the head. These are the types urging a no-fly zone of Ukraine, no matter what a reckless gesture that might prove to be. This revived something must be done tendency is tautologically justified by the argument that doing nothing is intrinsically worse. Silence is worse. Not doing something makes you an appeaser or an apologist. Well, we mere onlookers assuage the natural instinct to do something by showing the Ukrainian colors in public or online. Bellicose politicians and commentators actively indulge in and stoke our primal urges and fears with their ramped up rhetoric. And in doing so, they threaten to make matters worse. This is virtue signaling and competitive compassion taken to its logical, horrible conclusion. On Wednesday, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, joined those voices arguing that NATO shouldn't rule out a no-fly zone over Ukraine. These may seem like strange words from someone who doesn't want Scotland to have nuclear weapons and whose separatist aspirations threaten the very existence of the United Kingdom and the integrity of its armed forces. Ostensibly, even stranger is Sturgeon's simultaneous support of potential war with Russia and the more cuddly cause of transgenderism. But logically, this does actually make sense. Again, going back to Eugenius at the top of the show, there's just one issue now, us versus them. As well as living in an age of emotionalism, Patrick West continues, we live in a time of tribal politics. And these are a strange sort of tribal politics. They are no longer about left versus right, but more about feeling versus reason of fashionable causes that earn you peer approval versus unfashionable causes that don't. Sturgeon, for example, is the vanguard of what might be called the axis of feeling. People adhere to something must be done politics are naturally going to be sympathetic to transgenderism, as that way of thinking is also based on voguish emotion and wishful thinking. The same type of person understands and speaks of matters in alarmist hyperbole. There is a climate emergency, just as our NHS is perpetually X days away from collapse. I suppose that should be our NHS. Likewise, Brexit was going to be the ruination of our country, they thundered, as they slandered Leavers as morons and xenophobes. They agree with Black Lives Matters, which hysterically claims racism is ubiquitous, and they're strongly in favor of lockdowns and compulsory face masks, stemming from an emotive and paranoid view of the pandemic. It's a tendency, not a rule, of course, but you can visibly see this axis of feeling in operation on the multitude of flags and symbols on people's Twitter handles for all the above causes. To put it crudely, on one side today, we have those who channel their feelings, instincts, and fear into their worldview, and those who are circumspect and rational, and we are damned for it. Yes, but women are very much involved in this, at the forefront of this. And this sort of womanish behavior was not permitted in public not that long ago. I'm going to make a fuss. I'm going to demand that anything be done in order to demonstrate my empathy to the world. And this is going to come back at me and give me a warm, grateful feeling. That is not the basis of public policy. It is absurd. But if one does not act like this now, then one is considered to be cold and rational and just a bad person. And we can't survive acting like this. Women will often go to enormous lengths to make their feelings known on a subject in words and in deeds, and it often ends very badly indeed. And when they are caught out at this, they will typically respond, "My intentions were good." Are they good? Really? Were they in this case that everyone had to know how you were feeling, so you had to make some grand gesture? Did you really think this story was going to have a happy ending? Well, no, what kind of ending we get doesn't really matter, so long as their intentions were good. Now, people will say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but as C.S. Lewis pointed out, the road to hell is paved with bad intentions. And I'll just finish up with this briefly. Joanna Williams, as a columnist in Spike, called John Bercow's fall from grace was long overdue. Bercow is frankly, a disgusting man who was unaccountably the Speaker of the House of Commons in England for what, slightly over a decade. And of course, he has a ridiculous wife who never leaves an excuse. This is an excuse to get herself into the papers. She's quite an attractive woman, I must say. So it's kind of a mystery how Berkow, who was a very small man, managed to hook her. But so he is a non-person now, according to the Parliament. But the point that Joanna Williams makes is that, apparently he was a bully. Oh, bully, 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 bully. But that's not what was so seriously wrong with John Berkow. What was seriously wrong about him was because he turned parliamentary democracy upside down in Britain. Williams comments, "It is a shame that Berkow's fall from grace came about because of an expensive and time-consuming parliamentary inquiry into bullying. Berkow seems to have been an appalling boss. Talk of bullying, however, is the language of the playground. In politics and in the workplace, passions run high and tempers fray. As adults, we have to learn to deal with this without seeing ourselves as children in need of protection. Throughout history, there have been undoubtedly far worse tyrants and bosses than Berkow, but they have never been referred to as bullies. Expanding childish and emotive language into the adult realm does workers no favors. Getting one over on a sadistic boss is a Pyrrhic victory if it leaves you cast as the childlike victim." Well, indeed, but this goes back to the point that Patrick West was making about the tyranny of emotion. Who cares about essentially John Berkow making himself the prime minister, or at least first minister of Britain? No. The real issue is that he was such a bully. Indeed, this is the way that children talk. And of course, I'm reminded of a famous verse from the first epistle of St. Paul to the Corinthians, and it is chapter 13. "Just so, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I had the intelligence, the thoughts of a child. Since I became a man, I have outgrown childish ways. At present, we are looking at a confused reflection in a mirror." Well, people don't want to put away childish ways anymore, do they? And they are quite happy at seeing a confused reflection in a mirror. Perhaps if they are man, they see themselves as a woman, or vice versa. And of course, they expected to be applauded for it. Praise to the skies. Let's take a final look at the chat. Don Willis says, "Peace unto the KMG chatniks." Thank you. Don Willis, thank you for your kind words as well. "I Will Survive," Gloria Gaynor and Entitled Karens. I like Cake's cover of that quite a bit. Ogan's Iron says, "Anyone knows if Eli, I hate white people misstyle is an alphabet?" I don't know about that. I don't know. I'm just amused by that thing that he's got on top of his head. I don't know which is more risible, the top of his head or the top of Whoopi Goldberg's head. "Could Smollett get accepted into a Jewish prison privilege?" Well, he's not a federal offender, so unlikely. There was a great deal of talk about that in the third season of Succession. Poor Tom Wambsgans was upset. He was going to be sent to prison, and he was becoming knowledgeable about prisons, including a prison in New York State, which was known as the Jewish prison, which was thought to be nicer than the norm. Hello to Clown Welt. "MAGA country will now even be more out of control in Chicago," says Gamion. Yeah. "Kevin is not suicidal. Always remember that, chat bro," says Ann Run. No, I'm not. Say what you like about Jussie, but that meme concerning his triple provenance is absolute fire, says Clownvelt. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it. I will be back on the air tomorrow, which is Wednesday, at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via interact at kevingrace at shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.